Alright, so today we're going to talk about Laravel. It's going to be Laravel 5. This talk's kind of taken an evolution throughout the years. It started as a Laravel 3 talk. With each version, I just updated it. So we'll get kind of a good spectrum of everything's changed. We'll get a good view of the EDC and routing and things like that. I'm Ben Edmunds. You can catch me at Ben Edmunds on Twitter or benedmunds.com. It's my blog. If you want to catch up after this talk, anything else you want to talk about further, maybe you think about something else you should try out with the framework, get a question on, feel free to hit me on Twitter, and I'd be glad to answer any questions. I do some open source work, mainly with code matter. I'm the iron off communication code matter, which is kind of what I'm more known for. And I've contributed to Laravel to a bunch of other projects. I wrote the Building Secure PHP Applications book, which would be cool to check out. Use the ski PHP coupon code and save $10 on that. I do the PHP Town Hall podcast with my buddy Phil Sturgeon. We just have some guests on the show. We kind of just chat for an hour. No real agenda. We start out with an agenda and then tomorrow. It's a fun time. And then the CTO mindfulware, we do insurance and medical software, mostly using PHP with Slim, Codematter, kind of jump around a bit, and then we're doing a lot of Node now as well. So when we talk about PHP or Node, kind of a different game. All right, let's jump in. What is Laravel? Laravel is a web framework. It's open source and it is full stack. It's grown throughout the years. So when Laravel started out, it was kind of a Slim framework, very small stack. Laravel 3 is forged, it's kind of medium stack. And now Laravel 5, let's say it's a full stack framework. It has everything you need to know, everything, all the pieces you need to build a very large scale enterprise size application. Or you can scale it down, you don't have to use everything in there. And you can build a small app. It also has the Lumen framework. It's also released by Taylor, same person behind Laravel, which is kind of a stripped down version of Laravel. It's just the routing and some of the core pieces. And then you pull in what you need. So it's kind of like the Slim or the Sinatra of Laravel. And then it also has a very easy integration path. So if you start out with Lumen, you go through, you build maybe a very bare bones app or API. And then, app grows and you need something bigger, you need more components. It has a very easy upgrade path to the full version of Laravel as well. Taylor Rotwell's behind it. Really great guy. Recommend following him on Twitter, Taylor Rotwell. Feel free to ask any questions there. They have an IRC channel, also some Slack channels. Lots of forums you can attach to any issues. All right, why might you want to use Laravel versus whatever you're already using? It has a very expressive syntax. So here we can see we're doing a route get, then user find, and then view make. And in this case, we're just doing a view with. The idea behind this is that we're structuring it in the order that we're doing things. We're using words to describe expressively how we're going to do it. You're not calling the method and then passing it through a couple of words at the end of the function calls or whatever. We're using words to chain methods together to build on what you want as your end result. So a good example of that is the view with. So instead of saying view and then view and then passing through a bunch of parameters that are your variables you're passing through your view for the building process, we have this with method call. It's just it's not light chaining, but it's an example of how Laravel structures its API in general. So that when you're going to act on something, you call new methods with a descriptive word of what you're going to try. It's very expressive. It kind of walks you through it. And if you know how to do a certain thing, a certain part of the API, so like the model layer, you can kind of assume how it's going to work throughout. So you assume you're going to work the same way. But it's very expressive API syntax. It utilizes the latest PHP features, so namely namespacing, TSR4 auto-loading, interfaces, and it has an immersion with control container with a very cool facade thing we'll walk through for that to make it easier. Uses service providers. So with that, we have a very decoupled, it's very flexible. We're not committed to any certain part of the framework. You can just write a service provider and throw it in there to override that part of the framework. Also uses a data handling, so if you're out the framework, if you want to do something, it calls events on itself. So if we need to do something, say after a save a model, if we need an event that's called after that, you can hook into it and use it in your application. So it gives you a lot of flexibility where you don't have to modify the core to do something. You can just hook into that event that's already been called. Uses contracts, which is really just a Laravel term for improvement interfaces. So an interface, as you hopefully know, is just it's a template for your application, template for an object to follow. It means that you're going to provide these certain methods, you're going to do certain things with your object. A contract is a group of those. So it gives you loose coupling, so you're not tied to exactly the Laravel way of doing it. You can write your own contract, your own group of your own implementation of these groups of interfaces to fulfill what it requires without using what Laravel provides. This gives you a lot of flexibility and also a really good ability to testing. So if you're going through your test suite, you're writing unit tests, you can quickly override core modules, and you just have to make sure that it follows that contract. And you know that it's going to adhere to what the framework expects. The slides, like I mentioned earlier, are really just a quick start. So instead of having to worry about the entire version control, instead of having to know how to inject your dependencies, you can get quickly started with the facade. The facade here is subject or object equals new class, object set key value. Or we could just do class set key value. So we're using a static method. It's basically a singleton pattern that then instantiates the default dependency that we need and then calls them. If you wanted to override this for testing, or if you want to inject your dependencies, you can certainly do that. But if you want to just use the default dependencies that Laravel has, you can call that facade, and it just sets up all the dependencies for you without like your controller constructor having to be 20 lines long because all the dependencies you're injecting. It'll just automatically assume that's in the app object. It's very well documented. This is really kind of where it shines. If you go check out the docs, they're super easy to follow, super comprehensive. Everything you need to know is usually there. It has everything you need to get started. Quick starts and then more detailed information as well. It comes with a really cool CLI tool called Artisan. It handles many things. One of the things you'll probably use most with it is either for scaffolding, for database migrations, setting up new models, things like that. If you're used to, say, Ruby or Django, things like that, that had very nice command line tools, this will make you feel at home. You can pretty easily bootstrap and get started with your project just by typing a couple commands. None of this is required. You can do all this by copy-paste or by setups on your own. You don't want to use the command line tools. You have the flexibility of using use of command line tools, or if you don't prefer that, you can do it manually on your own. This command here, which is migrate your database to the next version. So if we have different versions of the database, we have, say we add a user field to the table, and we call them migrate here. It's going to run whether our next version of the database is to apply those database changes. It is PSR 2, 3, 4, and 7 compliant. So that means that it follows the PHP FIG standards. So when I talked yesterday, you know a little bit of what that is. It's a community standards body that just recommends standards for community users. Lots of frameworks are going to get on board saying, hey, we're all doing a lot of the same things. We're all using very different objects and classes. We're writing our own code to do something that's been done before. So they're getting on board together. They're teaming up to say, hey, let's share what we can. Let's share the coding styles. Let's share interfaces between each other, things like that. So it follows these PSRs, which are PHP standards recommendations. This gives you auto-loading. It gives you 1 and 2, give you code styling, gives you the standard HTTP request response handling, things like that. Split on Composer. So any package you see on packages.org, or if you have, say, a company Composer installation, they will automatically auto-load through that. So you just say, in your auto-load, your Composer JSON, hey, I need this package, you install it, and then when you're in your Laravel app, you just say new your object, and then it will know how to automate that through composing. So it has a lot of compatibility with the project. And it's a timer module, kind of how I've spoken throughout. It's very easy to take pieces from away, change. It gives you the flexibility to modify it as needed without touching any core files. It's very modular, kind of mix and match. There's a real focus to test coverage. PHP in the last few years has done very well in promoting unit testing and better test coverage. Laravel follows that track. It has great test coverage, and it gives you a lot of tools, even through Artisan, where you can write tests for yourself and then quickly and easily run those in your applications. Like I said, it's a full stack framework, which we probably all know what that means. It gives you all the tools you need to build a very large application out of the box. But it's also a full stack ecosystem. So this is the thing that's a little different between a lot of frameworks. There's a focus not just on the framework and the code itself, but the entire ecosystem around it. So where do you go for help? Where do you go for documentation? Where do you go for hosting? How quickly can you get started? It's not just about the code, it's about the entire developer experience from when you start using the framework to when you deploy to production. Parts of that is Homestead. So Homestead is a Vagrant box. You go down with the Vagrant box, you can start it, you just Vagrant up from your command line, and you have a working Laravel installation app ready to use and work with. So literally within like 10 minutes, no setup really on your own. If you already have Vagrant installed, you just download the box, you start it up, and you're ready to go. Very quick start. Has Forge. So you're starting with your Vagrant box, make a quick start click, you're using your docs, you're using the framework, you get to the point where you want to deploy it somewhere. Forge is there for you with that. You can quickly and easily take that Laravel app and deploy it to several cloud providers, AWS, DigitalOcean, wherever you want to go, and it gives you that hosting. All right, let's compare a little bit against other frameworks so you can kind of see where this sits in the ecosystem a bit. CodeIgniter is a little bit of an older framework. It's also MVC design. Laravel really kind of slot into the community when CodeIgniter was on a down ramp. So CodeIgniter hadn't been updated in a few years. People were really looking for what's the next fast, easy to use, good compatible framework. Because that space wasn't really taken up. There's the Slim frameworks. There's like of course, Slim, the Sinatra style frameworks. But CodeIgniter was always a little more than that. It was more like a medium stack. And that's really where Laravel came in. It was very easy for someone to get started, to learn, but it really filled that role. So that's, you can kind of think of it as the natural successor to CodeIgniter in that way. CodeIgniter is still an active project, and it has a version 4 coming out that will address a lot of the concerns that people have with it right now. But if you're trying to figure out where Laravel sits, it's probably somewhere between like a CodeIgniter and a Symphony. Really, if you're trying to just kind of place it in your mind. And again, it's flexible though, so you can turn it into whatever you want. Symphony is a very full stack framework. It's mostly used in kind of larger enterprise-y type systems. With that, it has a bit of a load, and it's also really hard to get started. So it really assumes that you know a lot of what you're doing. Whereas Laravel doesn't. Laravel tries to make it really quick and easy to get started. Symphony is very good design, has very good design patterns and architecture. It will scale great to a large application, but it does take a little while longer to get started. And that leads us back to Laravel. So it's beyond just MVC. It's got MVC, but it also has a routing component, so it's more like an MVCR design. It has, like I said, very easy to get used, and very easy to start, and very easy to use. And it has the full developer lifecycle from start to production. All right, hopefully I convinced you at this point that it's at least worth looking at. It sounds interesting. So let's look at some code and see how this falls apart. To get started, you can install the Composer. Here we're just going to do a Composer create project. And this will download the framework and bootstrap a project for us. From there, our structure looks like this. It's a little different than your traditional MVC thing. You don't just have like models using controllers. It's a command bus based architecture. So we have commands, providers, controllers, or routes, or both, whichever way you want to structure that. Use your flexibility. You have middleware and services. Then you, of course, have views and models, or you do repositories, and you have your ORM component there. And that's a full picture. the structure, which we won't really walk through, so it's boring. Routes. You create your routes here. There's a routes.php file. If you need more, if you want to just keep it as simple as possible, you just take that routes PHP file and you include other routes. So usually I'll have like a routes directory, and then I'll have, say, users.php. Now we can take all my /users routes. And then my routes.php is really just an include of whichever ones I need. If you want to get performant with it, you would just detect where you're at in your application. So am I calling /users this, so let's just include /users. You can get fancier and more performant with it. But at the base of it is just PHP. So you're just going to include the files you need for the routes. All right, you have methods available inside these routes. You have your standard HTTP verbs, get, post, put, patch, delete. Then you do all. Or I'm sorry, any. So any will just give you any one of those that you hit in that endpoint will route through that function. So what it looks like to register a couple. So here we're doing a route and match. We're going to match on both get and post. And then we're going to call, we're going to get and post, and then we're doing a /. So just a get or post anything to the / endpoint. We're going to call this callback function, this closure. And we're going to perform what's inside that closure. Then you hit a get or post on that / endpoint. This is a quick example of just a get call. So a route get for /. So if you just go to your browser and you type in /, whatever's inside our project, it's going to then go hit this closure. And then that's our output to our browser. It's that simple. Testing. So we got the output of the browser. We've done a quick route. We know how to respond to a GET request. How would we test that? Like I said, Laravel's very good on testing. Here we have artisan test, and then we run all the tests in our test directory. And to test that, we just go here, and then we're going to say this is our basic text example. You know whether you want your name. Then we're going to do an assertion here. So we're going to do this, visit, get. And then we're going to make sure that we see boom, because that's what we were echoing from our other output. It's a very basic example. You can do more to make sure you see certain parts. You can make sure that you get redirected, things like that. There's a lot more available to you, but it is the most basic example. We're just going to make sure that boom is somewhere on the screen by visiting this URL and checking that we see it. Again, we would just run that with artisan test. And that will be the output for our test. So we see we have an assertion and it passed with an OK. All right, let's build a little API in Laravel. Show how quickly we can do that. Definitely using our routes here because it's a pretty easy way to get started. So here we're going to do a route get to the API user endpoint. We're going to pass through in our closure the ID that we have. This is the user ID that we put in the URL. And then we're going to respond back with a JSON encoded array, the user, and then it says true. So we can see on the user, it's just an array. We have the user, and then we're going to user find. So it's using our model to go look up that user based on the ID. Another quick little shortcut Laravel has. Of course, as you know, usually with your APIs, you're going to return back XML or JSON data. JSON's really preferred nowadays. Laravel has a little shortcut here, so you don't actually have to JSON encode every time you return. You just return back an array. It's going to assume that you don't want to return PHP to your user, so it's going to automatically JSON encode that for you. Yep.
Well, automatically set the content type response for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's it only works with JSON, but it's just a little shortcut. Now we're going to test that API endpoint. So we have the user test, it's in the test case. And then test case users, we named it here. We're going to go to that endpoint here, which is user 1. So we're just going to hard code it. We're going to the first user. And then we want to make sure you get success true. In the actual test case, you probably want to make sure you had certain user data that you expect, things like that. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to make sure that we get success true in the JSON data that's returned. Then we just run that with artisan test like before. We would have one assertion. Okay. Again, you have all the HTTP verbs available to you. So as you design your API, we probably just want to do route get, route post, and respond appropriately to what your user user's trying to do on that endpoint. Some people prefer controllers. If you have a very large application, a lot of times controllers give you a lot more structure that you wouldn't necessarily have with routes without having a lot of your own code on top. You can still use controllers, you can still use routes, you can use them together, or you can choose one or the other. It really just depends on how you need to structure your application. Here, we're doing a controller for a status. So we have status controller create, and that responds to a post status endpoint. And that's what a controller looks like. It's just a controller is for a status controller. We define the controller class, and then we have the create method inside of that. So we have the route set up, and that at create tells us to point to the create method inside that status controller. And then that controller gives us the structure of the normal controller type class that we're used to, and the create method inside there. There's also some magic functions where you can say just auto load the routes based on the way I name the controllers. I don't usually recommend those, it's not quite as explicit. And especially if you end up mixing routes and controllers in some project. If you're auto loading your controllers, it can be a little difficult to figure out, okay, where did this response come from? Did it come from a route or from the controller? So I really recommend just always explicitly stating for this endpoint respond with this controller method. All right, middlewares. Who here has used a middleware before? All right, good. We'll get to a little bit about what a middleware is. A middleware is the idea of, as we go through our call stack for applications. So we come in at the door, we go to this endpoint, and then we go to the next step of our application, maybe that's our database processing. And the next step of our application is our view model layer response, right? Our middleware sits between our HTTP request, our initial request coming in, and then our application logic. So before we do anything with it, we have that middleware sitting there. And it's just a call stack, so it's just your normal, like, computer science kind of stack object where you just have a 1, 2, 3, 4 in a stack. We're going to do 1 before you do 2, before you do 3, before you do 4. So this gives us the ability to act on things before our application logic takes effect. This is a lot of flexibility to work with things before we even have to worry about an application. A good example of that is like authentication. So we make sure that our users authenticated before we can hit any of our route logic or any of their controllers, anything like that. If they're not authenticated, we can take them somewhere else and have them logic. Laravel uses middlewares for a lot of things inside the app, inside the framework, and then also various frameworks, various applications use it as well. So common uses are auth, as I mentioned, ACL, caching, sessions. Also debugging, so if you want to add like extra benchmarking or debugging on how your application is doing or where you're at in your application, middleware is a great place to do that. You just write a middleware, throw it in there. You don't have to touch any of your application logic, and you can debug what your app's doing as it goes through the HTTP class. But again, there's tons of things you can do with middleware. Anything that you would normally kind of hard code into your application is universal. You can move up to middleware, and then it's going to work between that HTTP request and your application logic. Gives you a lot of flexibility. This is what one looks like. So here we're doing a route post status. This is our status create, call from earlier in the controller. But here we add the middleware off. So we're going to make sure that our users are authenticated before we let them create a status. And instead of having to hard code our checks into our controller, so is this user logged in? Oh, the user's not logged in. Let's go redirect it to a login page. We can just throw that middleware, which is universal across our app, to check to see if they're logged in. A lot drier that way. We can also do more than one middleware. So again, it's a stack call. So it's going to go in the order that you call it, in 1, 2, 3 order. So here we're going to call more than one middleware, and you see that first, second, and third. That'd probably be like auth, ACL, caching, things like that. So you check to see if they're logged in, check to see if they have access, and then check to see if you have a cache version of the page already available. What a middleware looks like in Laravel is this handle method. So here we have middleware is our Ajax middleware, is our class. We're going to handle that request. So this is an HTTP request coming in, hasn't been through our application yet. We're going to take that request, and then we're going to do something on it. So in this case, we're going to check to see if our Ajax call, because this API only takes Ajax calls for whatever reason. Maybe it's a this API, right? This is not an AJAX call. We're going to return back an unauthorized response. If it is, we're going to go next. So notice here how we don't take any application logic on this. We don't take them to a certain page. We don't log them in, etc. So either it works or it doesn't. If it does, we're just going to call next, which is the next object in the stack. Because there could be another middleware after this one. You'll know this is the last middleware. That's how we get that flexibility to be able to chain these together. You can also do groups. So like before that we passed in the middleware to the endpoint, maybe we know that all of our users or all of their statuses are all going to need to be authenticated before they can act. So we just define a group here, and that group will call out middleware on all of those endpoints. Just gives you a little better syntax so that you're not repeating yourself over and over in your declarations. All right, database. Working with databases in Laravel is really a breeze. It's one of my favorite frameworks for working with database objects. It has an open ORM, which is really just super simple and beautiful to work with. There's a lot of frameworks, a lot of ORMs are really crafty, really slow, and really you just hate working with them. Laravel is very nice and simple, and it's easy to drop back to like just a query builder. If you want to drop out of an ORM and not use it, you can do both simultaneously. It also gives you migrations and seeding. Like I showed you before, when I make database changes, you can migrate the database version, you can roll back the database versions, it handles all that for you programmatically. So you're going to type code, and that code will run through the migrations. Then you can also seed. So if you need to seed a test site, let's say you're running like a Docker container to start the test QA site, you can seed that database with the test data so that your users are starting into the data set to QA off of. Query Builder is super easy. It is used by the Eloquent ORM, and you can use them simultaneously. So I'll show you what that looks like. Here we're doing just a normal Query Builder. We're doing DB table. So we have a DB object. We're using a facade to bootstrap it. We're doing our statuses table, and we're saying where email equals this example email, and then first. So first means we're just going to grab the first item out of that response. Maybe you only have one item in response, and that's fine. But you're going to grab that first one. Here we're going to insert and get ID. Again, Laravel is very expressive. So instead of it being insert and then you have to call something, add a true flag on the end to get the ID back. Here we have a different method name, insert get ID. That tells us to insert it and then have it return back the ID of the newly inserted record. And it's also very efficient, which I'll look through a little bit of that here in a minute. So this is how we define the Eloquent model. So this is not just the query builder. This is the Eloquent, which is the ORM Eloquent model. We define it as easily as this. So with this basic example, if we follow the correct naming structures, just really a third normal form in our database, then all we have to do is that, and we can use that model right away. So based on this model here, status extends model, we then can call this. So we have our status, where user ID is 1, and then first. That's going to query our database. Look for the user ID is 1, and it gives the first record back. So we can use it. A little more advanced query. Here we're doing where user greater than 100. So this might be you're trying to sort for your most popular status updates or something like that. Here we're going to call this back, and notice we're doing a get here instead of a first. So because we're running more than one record, we're going to do a get, and it's going to turn back an array of all the records we need. By default, it's going to be an array of objects, so our actual rows are going to be objects, and then it's just going to be an array of those because there's only one. The first is going to be a single object. So what a relationship looks like with ORM. So here we're defining our user inside of our status. So this tells us that our status belongs to the user. And that's going to set up, it's going to look for the user underscore ID field, so it's going to assume in the table. And then here we can retrieve that. So because we know that it belongs to a user, users have emails, we can do status find user email. So see if we're just calling out a method call, we're using magic methods in the back to convert those. When you call that user, it's going to then go and query for that user. So here we have a status, and then when we call user, it's going to query that user object based on the user ID in the status table. Then we have access to the user objects, and then we can call email, user email. So we have a really quick way to set up that relationship and quickly access all the way through our relationships or our statuses. Very little work. Again, so normal usage looks like this. So for each status, we're going to call the user and then pull their email. With that, that means that for every status, we're going to query for their user. In a loop, that's going to be a really bad performance impact, right? So here we've got 100 statuses, that's going to be 101 queries. So for every status, we're going to call the user. That's where a lot of people get hung up on overruns, because you quickly run into performance impacts. But there are ways around this. So here we're going to use what's called eager loading. So we're going to tell it beforehand that we're going to go ahead and preload all the users for these statuses. And then we can still access it the same way. It doesn't change our actual application logic. We just change the way we initially load. And that's what it looks like. So instead of 101 queries, we now have 2 queries. Because it's going to say, okay, we have all these statuses, we know all the user IDs. Let's do another query with like a where in. So where user ID in, and then we're going to follow users. So we went from 101 queries to 2 queries. You can still around, we still have all that magic there, but it's really performant.
You can go back to that first query.
No? Yeah. So it went from that to that. As I mentioned earlier, Laravel has events. The ORM also has events. It follows the same structure throughout, so everything you do with Laravel generally work the same way. So instead of having to extend our models or hack the core, whatever you might do in other frameworks to make this happen, we can hook into these events. So we can see when this model was saved, we can call this. So when this model's not saving, maybe we call this extra function to go do whatever. So maybe we're processing images. So once this image is loaded, this photo is saved to the status. We go and call another method, throws out a background job in the queue to process the images and convert on, clean it up, whatever. All right? That's just one example. You can see we have all these available to us in these models. All right, what does views look like? So here, you saw this example earlier. We're doing a get call / endpoint, and then we're creating a view. So here we have view home index. What this is going to go do is it's going to go look in the home directory at the index.blade.php file. Blade is the name of the Laravel view template engine. Where you send data to this, you pass it through in a view object. So you create a view object and then you add data to it. Or you can do this, where you just call the view method or function call, and then you call the with method on top of it. So that you're just injecting data into that view. This is the other way with the object. So we're creating the view object, and then we're just calling properties on the object to build up the view object. What this looks in the actual Blade template is like this. So here we just have our normal HTML, and then what we're going to use a data object that we injected, a variable. We just do these braces, and then a variable call inside the braces. You can do 2 braces or 3, just depending on if you want to escape the output or if you want to output the wrapped up. It also gives you some really cool kind of shortcuts here in the view templating. So usually we would do something, if we were just doing a PHP template, we would say if is set email, echo email, else echo this default variable. So here with Blade, we can just do this quick syntax here, which is email or this. So if the email doesn't exist, we're going to output this default text. This is really great for default hellos or anything in the view that have a default text, or maybe like a form that has inputs and they have values or they don't. Things like that, where you usually would use the default or a variable to exist. And you can include web templates inside of the web templates. So maybe you want a header and a footer on all your pages, you can quickly just include those there. It's going to inherit all the variables beforehand. So if you previously injected data, it will just flow through those templates. All right, form request. where you get a lot of controllers boiled. There's a lot of kind of fights in the world of, do we want to handle this in our controllers, or do we handle this in our models? Maybe our form objects don't necessarily represent our data objects. So we're doing validation of the model or data object, and then we're also doing validation of the controller to make sure what we want from the form is what we expect. Laravel solves this problem with a form request. So you have a different object, it's a form request, and it handles what your form is supposed to look like when it comes in, but it also gets that logic out of your controller. So you're not loading up your controllers with all this form logic. Also keeps it dry, so you can use forms in multiple places with these form request objects without having to copy and paste between all kinds of different controllers or routes. This is what this looks like. Here we have a create status request. So as we used the status before, we can assume we have a status form here. What we're going to have in this form is an email and a text field. So you put in the email, and it's a hidden field with the email address. And then we have our text for our status. We're going to say it has to be required, and it's the email address. And then for our text, it's just required as a text field. Then in our controller, we can inject that. So this is our HTTP request coming in. We're going to do a type on this with a create status request. And we're going to inject this. So it's going to automatically apply that form request to our HTTP request coming in on this post object. Does that make sense? Does that line up? And it's a little different than a lot of frameworks do it. So we have this form object. This tells us this is what our form request looks like for this HTTP request coming in. And then in our controller, we're going to inject that until we expect it to follow this form request. If it doesn't, it'll then follow the form validation routines. It'll take you back to the last with errors. All right, facades. This is where Laravel gets a lot of heat with facades. Usually by people that are used to kind of the more stricter architecture frameworks. Some people are used to injecting all your dependencies that you need every time, because it does make testing easier. Problem with that is you're going to have like 20 line constructors where you're injecting all your dependencies. You have to know where all the namespaces for those are. And it really gets cumbersome if you're trying to throw something together quickly. Now, you're not making, the next Facebook, you're making a weekend project, and you don't want to spend 4 hours with that tracking down dependencies. You can just use a facade to quickly bootstrap your objects and then use the default dependencies. You can always circle back later and change your dependency injections. You can manually call them out, or you can use the facades up to you. You can also override your dependencies in your facades. So you can call your app object to manually override those, and you can still test it. So you can still use facades, you can still update your dependency injection to test. But it's a really quick way to get started. This is what it looks like. So session get food. What it's going to do is it's going to resolve behind the scenes to track down that namespace and that object, and then inject it properly. So it's actually just going to go back and look up in the app object and resolve that dependency for you. If you need to manage your class dependencies, if you want to inject on your own, you can still do that. So here we're injecting the request. You can see we're calling it a type of request variable, and then we're request session get key. So instead of doing session : get key, we're doing request session get key. You have both options here. Again, that's where a lot of the drama comes from. Don't be scared when you see all that. It's not that Laravel actually forces you to use a bad pattern. It's just that it gives you options. Most people's problem with this actually is in the name, because the facade pattern is another pattern in computer science, and it's really just a bad naming to call it facade. But the facade does have multiple meanings, so there's that. All right, that is the end of the walkthrough. You can see what it has to offer. Utilizes the best newest PHP features. Gives you easy access to create an API to work with endpoints. You have form requests, you have the model objects that are, you have a lot of flexibility to do what you need. You can grow your application from small to large without being forced into any certain pattern there. For further research, definitely recommend you check out the Laravel project, you check out the docs, check out the forums. The forums have a lot of great help. If you have any questions, there's lots of people really happy to help you. The book I recommend is Delari's Code Right. It's on the Loopop. It's he's constantly updating this thing. It's like up to 5 pages now. Basically, anything you ever want to know about Laravel, it's in Code Right. Taylor has a book named From Apprentice to pretty short, but it's more like a how to do advanced things in Laravel. So you might want to start with Dell's book and then move on to Taylor's. And then LaraCast is an amazing resource, not even just for Laravel, but for coding in general, although it is Laravel specific. They do short screencasts, ones that you could watch. You could probably watch one or two on lunch break pretty easily. It's like $8 a month. And it's really just walks you through all kinds of coding concepts, all kinds of software building concepts, but really focused on Laravel. So if you're using Laravel or not, I really recommend checking out Laravel. That's it. I would really appreciate it if you could rate the talk on Join In. This is the URL, so it's 16662. Check out the talk. Any comments, positive or negative, helps me make the talk better for the future. If you want to follow up with me later, then Edmunds on Twitter. I will be happy to talk. And yeah, so now let's do some Q&A. So what questions do you have? Yep.
Does the database, whether it's ORM or not, does it have any kind of tools for helping with doing transactions?
Yes. Yeah, so you do full transaction support. It has rollbacks as well.
Okay.
Any other questions?
The slides are on this, right?
No, not yet, because my hotel hates me. As soon as I get home Monday, it'll be up.
It'll be on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
On benedmundsuck.com or the joint data?
It'll be on the joint end, and then also I have a speaker deck, so you can see it there, and I'll probably tweet about it as well. I promised everybody at the talk yesterday that it'd be up yesterday, and then it was before I knew that holiday and like don't let you do that.
Is that an I or an L or a?
So. Oh, it's a one. Those are all numbers. Yep.
What types of projects do you prefer Laravel for, like if you're building endpoints or if you're building like dashboards or web interfaces?
So you're saying that I prefer routes or controllers, or what's the question?
Like what frame, like the Laravel framework, what do you?
Oh, what framework I prefer?
Uh-huh.
So it really just depends on the team a lot of times
Okay.
and the resources. So if you're doing something pretty real time, you know, like a real time dashboard, I'd probably recommend you look at Node or some type of invented async language that's really used to using WebSockets and streams. You can do that kind of stuff with PHP, but it's still a bit hacky. It's not quite mainstream. For more traditional projects, like where you're going to use PHP, I recommend Laravel. And a lot of the times I'll recommend starting with Lumen if you're going to do an API. So Lumen is like stripped down Laravel, made for APIs. Put your API there, and then if your application grows past that, then upgrade to form Laravel. If you're doing a traditional, like you have models for using controllers type application, Laravel's great to start with.
If you're just trying to like start creating a couple of APIs, custom APIs.
Yeah, I'd say Lumen for that.
Laravel will be good.
Yeah.
Are you going to say, what was it? I'm sorry.
Lumen?
Lumen?
L-U-M-E-N.
L-U-M-E-N?
Yeah, it's under the Laravel project. It's just like a stripped down version that's made to be really quick and simple just for APIs.
Do you know what is stripped out of it?
Pretty much everything but the routing. But then any piece of Laravel you want to use, you can just quickly add into it. So usually what I'll do is I'll use Lumen, which is the routing. And it's actually a different routing engine underneath. It's like faster routing underneath. So I'll use just the routing and like the ORM. And you just use those pieces together, and that's all you have. But then when your app grows, and so you want to add views into it or a form request, then you might want to upgrade the form Laravel. If it does simplify things a bit because it's all baked in, which is when you have to kind of inject dependencies around as you add in modules. Anything else? Cool. All right. Thank you for your time. Hope you really enjoy the conference.